Hello and welcome to the Everything Weather Podcast, the podcast where we talk with people about the weather world, explore and discuss everything weather, and have a little fun along the way. I'm your host, Kyle David, and today on the podcast, we're very excited to have Tyler Case. He's the Content Development Manager at Barron Weather. We're going to be talking a little bit about what he does there and about his weather story and what he thinks is going to be the future for visual weather storytelling. All right, Tyler, welcome to the Everything Weather Podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Before we get into the interview, I've got a fun game for you. So this is going to be the first of a couple on the podcast. So our first one, keep 4, cut 5 of something weather related. So for this, I've got a couple of weather themed parts of the day. You get to keep 4. You got to cut 5 though, unfortunately. So on the list, we have snowy winter days, crisp fall days, rainy spring mornings, summer night thunderstorms, windy autumn days, sunny summer afternoons, mild spring days, blustery winter nights, and dewy fall mornings.
Ooh. I gotta keep the winter one. I'm a snow person, so which is funny as someone who now lives in the South. But I gotta keep the winter, the snowy day. I think I gotta keep the crisp fall day because something about just fall and football and I don't know, that screams me. So I gotta keep those two for sure. I think I like the dewy. Was it fall? Was it dewy fall or dewy spring?
Dewy fall morning.
Okay, dewy fall I'll keep too because I'm a big fall person. And then what were the spring ones? I gotta throw in a spring one.
So we have mild spring days, and then we have rainy spring mornings.
I gotta keep the mild spring day. Let's keep it cool. I'm a Californian at heart, so I gotta keep the mild in there.
So I'm curious, what's your definition of mild?
I say mild is like anywhere in the 60s. And honestly, I would argue you could go all the way up to 75 and still consider that mild. I think once you get up into the upper 70s, lower 80s, you start talking about warm. So, I mean, not that I would be warm at 78, but I classify mild as probably 60 to 75. I know it's a large range, but
No, it's a fair range. I'm comfortable at that range too. So you've got snowy winter days, you said crisp fall days, you said dewy fall mornings, and you're going with mild spring days.
mild spring days.
All right, so on the list, you are cutting rainy spring mornings, summer night thunderstorms, which,
That is a good one. It's just here, especially, it's just so humid that I'm like, if I had to pick between listening to a thunderstorm and having actual comfortable temperatures, I think I'll take the comfortable temperatures at this point. If you'd asked me several years ago, I probably would have given you a different answer.
that's fair. I'll give you that. Also cutting windy autumn days, which, to be honest, we've been seeing for the last few weeks now, and all the leaves are everywhere. I'm comfortable with getting rid of that too. And we're also getting rid of sunny summer afternoons, which as a California native, I'm kind of surprised you cut that one.
I mean, every day is a sunny summer afternoon in California. It's especially, and when I was there too, because I left at 18 to go to Rutgers and then really never moved back. So I was there during peak drought period. Like they've since snapped out of that. So I always told people the concept of rain in the summer is so foreign to me as a young adult because I grew up, you just didn't see rain like May through September. That was very normal. Like it never rained. I can count the number of times I saw it rain in the summer on one hand in my hometown. It was nuts. I think that's probably why you just get bored of it.
Yeah, I feel like it would just be repetitive day in and day out, like at least sneak in a couple clouds. But that's just my opinion on it. But yeah, that's a solid list there, Tyler. I will give you kudos for weeding out the good ones and getting rid of some of the less desirable ones, but prioritizing those good weather parts of the day. With that said, thank you for coming onto the podcast, and we're going to get into talking about you, what got you into the weather. And I always ask everybody on the podcast, what is your weather story? So I'll ask you, Tyler, what is your weather story and what got you interested in everything weather?
It's funny because you talk to any meteorologist and you'll get different variations of the same story. But so there's always that one trigger, right? And it's like a lot of my colleagues going through school and even my coworkers now, they can all point to, okay, it was insert hurricane here or snowstorm here and stuff like that. Mine is unique because I don't have really any of that. Like I said, I grew up in California. I'm from Silicon Valley, so Sunnyvale is my hometown. It's a stone's throw away from Cupertino, which is home famously to Apple, and Mountain View, which is home to Google. Right in the heart of Silicon Valley, about 45 minutes south of San Francisco. That's where I grew up. There's not a whole lot of weather there. So sunny and mild is the climate. That's what we saw. Growing up, I didn't see a whole bunch of that. And I remember just occasionally you'd get a rogue thunderstorm would pop up. And to me, that was I was scared of it as first as a kid. And it was just such a foreign concept because, like I said, it barely rained to begin with, let alone a thunderstorm popping up. The first time I saw lightning, I was terrified. And then it was just like, what was that? I want to learn more about that. And it just grew from there. So I would flip through and watch the Weather Channel. And then I would see storm stories and I'd watch that. And it just grew from that part. My brother at the time wanted to be a sports reporter, so I would always do the weather and he would do the sports. So every morning my poor parents would wake up and they just listen to my brother and I talk to them nonstop about random things. If there was ever an active weather outbreak going on at the same time of a major sporting event, it was World War III for our one TV household over who won and got to watch it. And he would be like, but it's and like insert whenever this major sporting event is. And I'm like, but there's a tornado outbreak. That would turn into a fight. So I have fond memories of that. But I started at a young age, maybe 5, 6, writing to local TV meteorologists, talking about what I liked to do. I was interested in that. And I had one of them respond to me, came to my school, answered my questions, gave me a tour of the station, like all that stuff. And I think that was the tipping point where it's like, okay, I'm heart set on this now. So it was Spencer Christian, who actually worked on Good Morning America for a while, and then at the time was the chief meteorologist at the ABC station in San Francisco. So I got to go up there, play with the green screen, everything that a 10-year-old would want to play with. And yeah, then grew into it in middle school, high school, slipping through the channels and stumbled upon a very good Rutgers football team, knocking off a very good Louisville football team. I just accidentally stumbled upon that and asking my parents, because at the time, growing up on the West Coast, I'd never heard of Rutgers. And so I was like, well, where is that even? Because that's cool. Like, it looks like they're an underdog, right? And my mom, being from New Jersey, originally spent the first 8 to 10 years of her life in Monmouth County and then relocated to my hometown when my grandfather, got a new job, was telling me, oh, yeah, it's in New Jersey. And so I was like, oh, I wonder if they have like a Met program. And so I started looking at it, and that was really it. So it was, I loved the Weather Watcher program. It had everything I wanted to do. I loved that it was student run. That was it.
So you found out about Rutgers because of the Rutgers football team. And then from there, you went down the rabbit hole and found, oh, they have a meteorology program. I might end up going there.
Yep. That's pretty much what happened. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what made you want to go across the country as opposed to like staying on the West Coast or even like a little bit closer with like the central part of the United States?
And I did look at a couple schools in the central US too, but I knew I wanted to leave the state. There were some issues with the local schools and the schools and UC being so overpopulated that people weren't graduating on time because they couldn't get into the classes that they needed. So there was some of that going on at some of the schools that I like. And a lot of the schools in California didn't have a Met program, or at least one that focused on broadcasting, which is what at the time I really was interested in. And then, so that was part of it. The other part of it was I was always independent. My parents just raised me to be adventurous and be able to take on the world on my own. I had all the support in the world I could have ever asked for, but I was blessed enough to have the skill set to be like, I'm ready to do this and I want to rip the Band-Aid off it and move away. And that, I think, and my brother ended up doing the same thing. And I think both of us would tell you, I certainly would, and I'm pretty sure he would say the same thing, that was one of the better decisions we ever made because it really made it after we graduated. It was so much easier to be independent and take on the real world, not having that crutch of being so close to home. I was already used to fending for myself at that point. So that was another part of it. And then the third part of it, I'd also kind of other talked about, but I wanted to go somewhere where there was weather. I wanted to see it. I wanted to experience it. And growing up in sunny California, I didn't touch snow until I was probably 11 or 12. I was close to being a teenager for the first time I ever touched snow. And so I was like fascinated by it. And I was like, I want to walk in snow. I want to live in snow. And so I ended up obviously at Rutgers, and I would walk like in the fields and stuff, the unplowed sidewalks, solely because at home I never got to do that. So they'd have these nice salted and plowed sidewalks, and like for my underclassmen years, walk through the grass. Everybody would be walking on the sidewalk and I would just be trudging through the snow because I could. That was it. The funny thing was I had looked at some schools in Florida and didn't really want to deal with hurricanes. Ironically, I ended up at Rutgers during the what ended up being the middle of the dry spell of Florida, not seeing any landfalling systems for whatever it was, 8, 10 years or something like that. My first night in the dorms was Tropical Storm Irene. That was the first night I spent in the dorm, and then Sandy came the following year. So it was funny because I was like, I don't want to deal with hurricanes. Let's go to New Jersey. You don't see that there. And I got two, and Florida got zero. So it was kind of, I guess it technically wasn't two hurricanes. It was what, two tropical systems, is the better way of putting it. But yeah, still funny.
That kind of ironic too. And then the fact that you said you didn't touch snow until you were 11, 12, that's big because for me, I've lived in New Jersey all my life and I remember snow from a young kid all the way up to now, although it's not really much snow these days. But what was that adjustment like going from sunny and mild, in your case, dry for California, to very active weather? You had snow, you had Irene, you had Sandy, a whole bunch of stuff that year, and then going forward.
Yeah, it was definitely an adjustment because, like I said, in California, you don't have to worry about, especially in the summer, any outdoor event, barring some sort of wildfire or a major event like that, or excessive heat. You're not going to get anything postponed or canceled due to rain. It just doesn't happen in the summer, especially, which is when most of your outdoor activities, right, are happening. And so that took some adjustments coming there, like, oh, it actually rains here in the fall. Baseball games don't happen, things like that what would go on. So that took some getting into and having to like actually pay attention, like, oh, I got to monitor this because this might impact my life. In California, it rains. Sometimes you have to be aware of excessive rain, but at least in my part of California, other than that and wildfires, that was really it. So it was like, okay, how much is it going to rain? Oh, just a little bit. All right, I bring a raincoat to school and I'm fine. And in New Jersey, you had a lot more like, oh, I had to worry about thunderstorms where it might rain sideways for a solid like couple minutes. And so it's, yeah, I should probably stay inside now, or snow. And it's like, is class going to be canceled? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. And ice storms, all that stuff. Most of the collegiate time is spent there in the winter. So you're spending more time dealing with that than anything else. It was nice, I think. It was refreshing in a way to have that kind of variety.
You get to get a taste of everything with the weather and feel your passion even more. You had mentioned the Weather Watcher program. Talk a little bit more about your experience with that and some of the other experiences that you took advantage of at your time at Rutgers.
Yeah, so I did Weather Watcher all 4 years. I was in the living learning community for 2 years. I led it the second year. That was one of the things that I had noticed when I was initially researching the school, and I love the fact that it was mostly there were faculty advisors, obviously, but I love the fact that it was student run. And as I was looking at it, I'm like, oh wow, these guys actually they have a green screen. But there was just something about it where I was seeing underclassmen and I was reading about it, and they're like, it's not policed or anything like that. Like you just they give you the ropes and they give you the tools you need to learn how to properly develop your skills there. And then it's just up to you. Do you want to be just behind the scenes? Do you want to jump all in and be on camera? Do you want to be part of the leadership team? And I ultimately decided I wanted to be a major part of that. So I took the next step and led the living learning community my sophomore year, which meant living in the dorms again. But I willingly did that because I loved it so much my first year. I met some of my best friends. I still talk to them. Several of them were in my wedding. It was just a great way of getting involved with people with several interests. I always told people you don't have to be a meteorology major to be in this. If it's just something you're interested in, you just like television. Or we had a couple of theater kids who were just like, I just really like presenting and this is what I did. And so several different people did it who had no background and no interest in going into TV weather at all. And I thought it was awesome. You could all learn from each other in a little bit. Everybody did things their different way. So that was nice. And then I managed it for 2 years. I managed the transition from PowerPoint to a professional broadcast system. And that was my first taste into graphical production, which is what I do now. So that was a lot of fun. I got to work with that for 2 years, became really involved with the student chapter as well, was on the executive board of that for 2 years, vice president my junior year, president my senior year. Got to go to AMS conferences because of that and got to set up all the events for that and learned planning for the AMS conference and making phone calls to airlines and hotels and all that, trying to get tickets for, at the time, I think it was like 40 or 45 people or something like that, trying to get all that set up. My fond memories of doing that. My freshman year, I was very involved with the marching band there, which was a blast. I loved it. That was big part of my youth, like all the way through elementary school up into high school. I was in band and music, marched all 4 years of my high school career and then did it 1 year at Rutgers. Ultimately decided that just the time commitment was too much. I wanted to do more with the learning community and the Weather Watcher and the Met Club and student chapter. So kind of switched gears from that, did a little bit less of that, more kind of work stuff, which was a hard decision to make, but I do think it was the right decision for me at the time, especially. Met my wife there too. So she was the performing dance company, and one of her friends from the PDC happened to live 2 doors down, and that was how we met. So that was obviously a good positive side experience from that too. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like an awesome story that you met your wife or your current wife at Rutgers. That's a really cool story. I know a few people who have had similar experiences, not just at Rutgers, but in their college experience as well. And for our listeners who are listening who are wondering about the Weather Watcher program, the Living Learning Community, I'll just briefly say it's an on camera program. It allows students to get in front of the camera, talk about the weather, and I was heavily involved with it as well. Great program there. It's similar to, if I had to compare it, though Unitely has, the Oklahoma school has a program like that. Pennsylvania State, it's the campus weather service. So it allows students to get involved with broadcasting about the weather and telling the weather story, which is what you still do to this day. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. What are some other experiences that you got at Rutgers during your tail end of your collegiate experience?
Yeah, once you get to a certain point, at least at Rutgers, you have to pick a track, right? So they give you, at the time, it was climatology, environmental, and operational were the tracks you got to pick. And I knew I wanted to do broadcasting. I was in a class of, there were 14 of us. It was really nice to be in that small, tight-knit group of people. I always told people when I was giving them tours and stuff, 14 seems small, but especially when you get to an upperclassman, you're spending all your time together, right? So, because you're to the point where you've done all your GE stuff, all the math is done, all the English is done. So you're just taking out hardcore Met classes now and any of your minor stuff. So you're pretty much spending maybe close to 20 to 30 hours a week with these people. And then they become some of your closest friends for several years and even leading outside of school because you're spending so much time with them. But you have this close knit community and then the resources of a major university too. Pretty much anything you wanted to do was at your disposal. And we had some great professors who pushed me to apply to a variety of different internships. I was focused on broadcasting. So I steered towards those. I originally was going to intern at a station in my hometown, the CBS affiliate there. And for a variety of reasons that ended up falling through, they couldn't offer that internship anymore. I thought that was it. I was going into my spring semester already. It was like December of my junior year. So I was getting ready to start the new semester in January when I got that email that unfortunately you're not going to be able to intern here now this summer. And so I had stopped looking because I had that lined up. So I felt a little lost at the time. And then we went to the AMS conference that year was in Atlanta. We went, and ironically, it was, if you ever saw the Walking Dead posters with all the cars that were like stopped on the interstate, they had that ice storm in 2014. And someone did a before and after with the Walking Dead poster on one side, and then the other side was the actual picture of all the cars stopped in the ice. The AMS conference in Atlanta was right after that. So it was really funny because we had this major weather event. All the meteorologists came to town for this giant annual conference, and it was sunny and 70 the entire time. And then we all left, and another ice storm came through. So I always laugh about that because it was like we had that 1 week of nice weather when all the Mets came in, and then everybody left, and it all broke loose again. But anyways, so I ended up in Atlanta, which is home to the Weather Channel. Met a Rutgers alum there, Mark Elliott, who's no longer there, but I think he still does some freelancing there. But at the time, he was one of their prominent broadcasters. Talked to him a little bit. He encouraged me to apply to an internship at the weather presentation department. He says, I'll vouch for you. You're from Rutgers. I know I've talked to you and I'll vouch for you. Just list me as a reference. I'll see what I can do. Ended up getting that internship, moved to Atlanta briefly for 2 months, spent some time there, learned a lot, got a very extensive taste of what the production life was like. So that was outside of broadcasting. If you asked me going into that, I was like, I have no interest in doing producing. That's part of why I didn't really apply to those kind of things. I was like, it's just producing. I don't want to just produce. I want to be on air. I want to be that guy that's providing this information. And then the more I did that at the Weather Channel and even at Rutgers to a degree, the more I realized these producers do a lot. And it was a lot of fun at the same time. So I was like, I actually like this better than I thought I was going to. And so I learned from some of their best. I did end up getting a reel put together while I was there. Mark Elliott helped me set that up. So I'll be forever grateful for him basically getting me my job in TV outside of college. But it was an interesting transition for me because when I went back to Rutgers, I started applying some of what I learned there. And I realized I have a knack for this. I'm developing skills in this area, but I'm developing a love for it, is what it is. So I really enjoy sitting here and building this content. And then now I get to do that all the time. And it's a blessing, really, because it's just so much fun. It sometimes it feels a little thankless. The people who are on the air get all the credit. And they do a lot too. Do not get me wrong. Those people are very talented and very good at what they do. But the producers, especially that behind the scenes, I have nothing but the utmost respect for, in addition to all the on camera meteorologists out there.
Yeah, and that's a very cool full circle moment from being able to watch the Weather Channel to interning with them. Shout out Mark Elliott. He's a very awesome guy. Got the pleasure of meeting him at the AMS conference back in Baltimore this year at 2024. For those that don't know about the AMS conference, basically it's the biggest collection of weather weenies, meteorologists, anybody who is associated with the weather in some way, whether it's a hobby or a profession. Everybody is at that huge conference. Very fun, very educational. But I'm just curious because you mentioned you wanted to go into on camera, but now you mentioned that you got a taste behind the scenes, and that's basically your job now. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But what made you want to change that avenue, that career track for you?
Yeah, so I did end up on camera for a year. I was at the ABC station in Casper, Wyoming. I loved my time in Wyoming. Sometimes it was really hard, especially with the schedule. So it took a lot for me adapting. And anyone who works in TV knows this, where it's when you first start doing mornings, then that alarm goes off at 2:30 in the morning. It sometimes takes a while for you to train your brain to be like, I have to shift my schedule a little bit and almost be nocturnal. So there was a big learning curve there for me. But Wyoming itself is just so pretty. It was a really great place to live. I had a lot of fun. I got to go to Yellowstone in February, which I highly recommend anybody who, if that situation ever presents itself to you, jump on it because it is just gorgeous and nobody is there. So if you're a nature lover, that's the time to go because there's only one entrance open to get into the park because that's the only one they plow because of all the snow there. And you're at such elevation that snow just stays. So we saw wolves, we saw a moose, we saw more bison than I could count. So I highly recommend that. But that gave me a lot of opportunity there. But while I was at that station, we actually transitioned weather systems while I was there. And I had a trainer come out and work with us. And I got to do that at Rutgers as well. And both of them told me how awesome it was to be able to travel for work and do the production. And of course, me coming from this background producing, I was like, this is very intriguing to me. I'm an aviation nerd too. So I've always been super fond of flying and traveling and plane and all of that. So I'm like, something about that just sounds appealing to me. So situation presented itself at the end of that one year. Where I work now was hiring a trainer. I applied. They offered me the job and I took it that same day. And that's how I got started. So I was a trainer. I went around upgrading computers. So I got to do a lot of like technical stuff, which I'm really technically inclined. My dad's a software engineer, so I got that side of my brain from him. So I got to do a lot of that and I got to travel around the United States. I grew up in California. I moved to New Jersey for 4 years. I moved to Wyoming for a year and now I live in Alabama. So I've lived in all four time zones in the continental United States, which is cool. Not a lot of people get to say they've done that. And I went to so many different stations and met so many great meteorologists from all over the country. And it's cool to watch them grow and see people. I see some people at the Weather Channel now that you'll just look through the channels and you're like, I remember when I trained you, you were in Idaho when I went. So it's all about moving on up. And you see some people have left the business entirely and it's cool to see what they're up to as well. But I also got to go to so many different places that I otherwise never would have been able to visit. It's just like you get to go to cities in the Midwest and what a lot of people think is flyover country, but there's a lot that those states have to offer and those cities have to offer. So it's really neat to just be able to go there for work and be like, get to see and experience things like that. So I got to go all over and that was great. And then transitioned over as part of that, I was doing a lot of graphical prep, obviously, because before the installation would begin, we would build out a whole bunch of stuff. So we'd come prepared with all that. And so really fell in love with that, got even more in love with it. And then ended up being promoted to my current position, content development manager. So I oversee a graphics team. I have a team of very talented artists who help us build anything from lifestyle graphics. So like you got to make new Christmas icons or Hanukkah icons or Thanksgiving icons and stuff like that. So oversee some of that, but also a lot of phenomena based stuff. So how does a tornado form? What is wind shear? How does a radar work? We have a meteorologist who's also an artist, which is a rare combination to find. I have a really great team there. And I also do a lot of the mapping stuff. I've recently more gotten acquainted with GIS based platforms and things like that. So that's really cool. So I get to do stuff like finding raised regions or making border sets for different areas and fire zones and all that kind of stuff. And I get to work with television stations all across the country and see all the cool things they're doing and the ideas they come up with and help them make it easier on them as much as I can to do their daily workflow.
Yeah, and before we get into a little more about your specific role right now, some listeners may not actually know what barren weather is. So for those listeners that are listening in, tell them a little bit more about barren weather and what you guys do there.
We have a couple of different tiers of the business. So we're based out of Huntsville, Alabama. That's where our main office is. Huntsville is referred to as Rocket City, USA. It's where all the Saturn V rocket was developed and built. And that's what the rocket that did all the Apollo missions back in the 60s and 70s. That's the Huntsville claim to fame. So I think the stat was more PhDs per capita in Huntsville, Alabama than any other city in the United States. It's something along those lines. I've heard that stat thrown around, which is cool to be like, I live here. And I always joke with whenever somebody says, well, it's not rocket science. And it's like here that has a different meaning because this is a town filled with rocket scientists. Anyways, it's a lot of fun being here, but we have a digital side of the business. So we have a product where we can transmit weather data to aircraft and boats. They can get like a receiver and we can help send them weather information for boat captains and private pilots. We have a program called ThreatNet, which a lot of storm chasers will buy. And it's essentially an online digital weather display platform they can use to look at radar. We also had some universities and places like that purchase that and use it for sporting events or university safety in general. We have a mobile app that we sell to television stations and other entities as well. They can use it for weather-based alerting. We have some proprietary alerts that we send out. We can provide early warning for lightning or thunderstorms or rotating storms. And then we have a radar side of our business as well, where we'll sell to governments, but also television stations domestically and abroad to give them weather radars they can use, just helping fill radar holes throughout the country. The side of the business that I work on is the broadcast side. We have a broadcast display platform called Barren Links that goes out to different entities, mostly television stations, but we have several universities that have it. Obviously, you mentioned OU Nightly. They use Barren Links out there at the University of Oklahoma, a couple entities, power companies, stuff like that. Anybody really who needs a broadcast display platform, they can use it for briefings. It could be a actual broadcast display platform that's going on a green screen or a monitor wall or something like that. And even some smaller entities of guys just doing weather or women doing weather on their own. Just they may have a social media following or something like that, and they'll grab a Barren Links and throw it up on Facebook or whatever your social media platform is of choice. Several of them will have apps too. And it's really cool to see it be used so ubiquitously. But I get to do a lot of work with the graphics for that. Everybody needs a 7-day. Everybody needs those maps and stuff like that. And so I get to work with a team and develop those. In some cases, we're the ones designing it and actually working with the end customer and getting that designed. Sometimes it's dealing with corporate entities and they send us the look and they're like, this is what we want the look to be. And we'll offer our input and give suggestions just based off of our experience, because it's all about making sure everything's easy to read. Got to get that information out there. And so we'll weigh all that together and come up with a look, and then we execute that and deliver it.
Excellent. And before we get too deep into that, we're going to take a quick break. And after the break, we'll get into a little bit more about what you do and what you see for the future of visual weather storytelling.
On this day in weather history, we go back to the 2003 Atlantic hurricane season. On December 4th, Tropical Storm Odette formed in the southwest Caribbean Sea, becoming the second December tropical storm on record to form in the Caribbean Sea after a hurricane in 1822. Odette tracked northeast and eventually made landfall near Cabo Delso in the Dominican Republic on December 6th. A day later, Odette dissipated and dissolved into a cold front passing through. At the same time, another tropical cyclone was beginning to develop further east in the Atlantic Ocean, in between the Cabo Verde Islands and the Azores. A couple of days later, on December 9th, this second developing system would eventually be classified as Tropical Storm Peter. While it was not expected to strengthen or impact land, Peter quickly gained organization and briefly showcased an eye feature as it trekked northward into open waters. By December 10th, Peter weakened into a tropical depression and was dissolved in the same cold front that absorbed Odette a few days prior. While Peter did not pose any threat to land, Odette brought moderate rainfall to the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Puerto Rico. 8 deaths were attributed in the Dominican Republic due to flash flooding and mudslides from the rain. The country's banana export business also took a big hit, with 35% of the Dominican Republic's banana crop being destroyed by Odette. While not record-breaking or catastrophic, Odette and Peter marked the first time since 1887 that 2 tropical storms formed in the month of December.
And welcome back to the Everything Weather Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle David, and today we're joined by Tyler Case, Content Development Manager at Barron Weather. We've been talking a little bit about his weather story from a California person to a New Jersey person as he ventured into the world of meteorology and the weather, and how he eventually ended up in his current role at Barron Weather. We've been talking a little bit about that. We're going to get into that back again. But first, I got another fun game for you, Tyler. We've got Weather Fast Money. So in the style of Family Feud, I've got 5 survey questions that people have answered, and you're going to give your best guess on what the top answers for each survey question are. And I don't have the sound effects board. I may get that in the future, but I'll improvise with my own sort of sound effects for the time. So with that said, are you ready, Tyler?
I'm ready.
All right. We're not keeping a timer going, but we're just going to get these in as quick as possible. And it's going to start with, name a weather condition that would be a good name for a wrestler.
A weather condition that would be a good name for a wrestler. Okay, hurricane. That's what I'm going to say first.
I'm just writing it down. Name something people take inside during bad weather.
Other pets.
Name a U.S. city known for having great weather.
Los Angeles.
Name something you do when it's snowing.
Build a snowman.
And name a smell you associate with fall.
Apples.
Okay. All right. We've got our answers locked in. And that last one's going to be very interesting when we get into that. So, first one was, name a weather condition that would be a good name for a wrestler. You said hurricane. Survey says number 4 answer. So 12 people said hurricane is the best name for a wrestler. Tornado was the number 1 answer.
Interesting.
Next one was, name something people take inside during bad weather. You said pets. Survey says number 2 answer. 36 people said take in their pets. Clothes is the number 1 answer. In my opinion, I feel like pets should be the number 1.
It should be the number 1. Most people don't hang their clothes outside anymore. Everyone has dryers, but that's okay.
I guess some people still hang their clothes outside. Next one was, name a U.S. city known for having great weather. You said Los Angeles. Survey says 13 people said Los Angeles. Miami is the number 1 answer.
So yeah, maybe I just overthink it as a Met. I'm just like, Miami's got too many other tropical issues and thunderstorms. It's like LA has sunny and warm every day.
That's true. And I'll give you the number 2 and number 3 that I have here. So people said San Diego. That was number 2.
San Diego's really good
And
too, yeah.
Phoenix is number 3, which I was
That's
kind of surprised that. Yeah, I guess some people like the hot, but hey, you know what? People said for some reason Phoenix, or 4 more people said Phoenix is better than Los Angeles. Hey, people have their different weather preferences. But something that people do share, next one is, name something you do when it's snowing. You said build a snowman. Survey says number 1 answer. 31 people, too, if you include Anna from Frozen. And then the last one, I thought this was interesting. Name a smell you associate with fall. And you said apples. Survey says number 5 answer. I got to, this number 1 answer is leaves. leaves is the number one answer, which
I mean, that was
I didn't know. I didn't know leaves had a smell.
it's because that was my first. Like, when you said that, my initial thought is leaves because that's what I associate with fall. When you say fall, you hear leaves, but you said scent, and I'm like, I had the same reaction. I was like, I don't associate a scent with leaves. You said scent, I think like cinnamon or apple. So apple popped into my head first. So
Yeah, I didn't even know it. Does it have a scent?
leaves, I'm sure there's candles that are like fall leaves scented. I don't know if there's a scientific scent for it.
Yeah, the other ones make sense. Number 2 answer was rain. Number 3, campfire. Number 4, pumpkin pie. Number 5, apples. But leaves, that's crazy. I Whoever put leaves as a scent, I wonder what your leaves smell like because they don't smell like anything here in New Jersey. I don't think they smell like anything in Huntsville for you. But yeah,
I'd have to go
that
out
is our.
and smell them. I don't know. Like, I'm not gonna go around my street sniffing leaves. So
I think you'd get a lot of curious eyes wondering, like, what are you doing? All right, that was our weather fast money. Let us know what you think each answer should have been. And with that, let's get back into our conversation about what you do at Barron. So we talked a little bit about you are involved with the weather graphics, the display of weather information over at Barron. I'm curious, what does your day-to-day look like with that role?
yeah, so usually I get in around 8 in the morning. It's looking at the schedule and seeing what upcoming installations we have coming up. So that's the first thing, is just reminding, okay, what are our deadlines that we're trying to make? A variety of meetings obviously thrown in there, just updating various stakeholders, or my team as well, checking in with each of them individually, making sure they all have what they need, all that kind of stuff. But then it's a lot of content build out. A lot of just, okay, I gotta get some maps put together, put some cities on there, do that kind of thing, get that set, and then send samples of those to the television stations to make sure that everything's accounted for, have them throw it up and do air checks with it, make sure everything's what they want. Because our goal with any of these installations is we try and make it as easy as possible on them. So we'll get all those graphics built out, all those decisions, like we need to have this city and remove this one, but add this county and those kind of things. Get all that done early. And then when we show up on site for training, we can focus solely on making sure you can use the software to the best ability. And that's just worked wonders for us. We've been able to do so much during our installation period and get stations launched while we're there, and really help them out. So that's what a lot of it is. On the front side is just getting all those quality control checks done and getting all the graphics prepped. But the other side of that is we're always trying to move forward and grow. So there's continuous development going on how we can be better and how we can add new features to make our users better and make their jobs and daily lives easier. A large part of that is testing and development. Some of it is from a design perspective. We have this new feature we want to add. We're going to pull various people in and see what's the best way of accomplishing X, Y, and Z. It's a lot of designing features and thinking, okay, I think it should work this way. We should make it this setting and you put it in this menu, that kind of stuff. But then a lot of, okay, we have a development team that knocks that out. They give us a piece of software and now we have to kick the tires on it. I work with a couple different ex broadcasters and we'll all do that as well because we can use the software and know how it's going to be used. Because oftentimes the developers don't necessarily know how what they're developing is going to be used. So they can test it from I'm not going to destroy your computer perspective. It goes into our hands internally to look at it, kick the tires on it, use it on a daily basis, and make sure that we're not introducing anything into the field when we release it. So we can make sure it's working as intended. And then, of course, it ultimately goes into beta testing where it goes to customer hands and then ultimately is delivered to the masses. But the first line of defense there is us kicking the tires on that. What are we trying to develop? Are there new features that we think will really help us get to that next level? Are there things that customers are telling us that they're like, hey, we really could use XYZ? So a lot of that's prioritizing and, okay, what do we think is the best course of action for us to do this? How are we going to make more people happy? And I think that's the other thing I really like about working here is it's a company at Barron Weather that actually listens to their customers. They are receptive to that feedback that we get, and we're continuously trying to get better.
And it sounds like you do a lot of different things there. You're doing designing, you're doing creating, troubleshooting, you're working with clientele. So you got a little bit of like marketing business in there. How do you work in your meteorology expertise into all of those non-weather related things? Because on a day-to-day basis, for weather, it's forecasting, it's science stuff, but you do a lot of non-science stuff. So how do you work that expertise into those things?
I do a lot of that. And we have many meteorologists who work with us, and some of them are doing primarily forecasting because we have that side of the business as well. So there are a lot of those that I work with. It's a balancing act for me. It's a little bit of infusing the meteorology into there. A lot of times it's with the phenomena explainer. So a customer will call us up and something's going on. I think of a recent example of it. Maybe it's an omega block or something. Something's happening. It's meteorological that's relevant to the news, to the story. And so it's, hey, I'd really like some graphics we could use to help tell this story. Like, this is what's happening. Because that was something I was brought up on as a college student, as an intern, as someone who shadowed, was just the most important thing a lot of broadcasters will do is the why. Sometimes there's some shifts away from that, but that's a value add I think that a meteorologist brings to the table that a mobile app by itself can't do. It is, I can offer insight into why it's happening, and I can talk to you about why it matters to you. I can have that conversation. So that's one big thing. The explainers are a large part of that. And so I get to infuse some of my background into those, making sure that whatever we're designing is scientifically accurate, leading the way to a group of talented artists who can help me visually tell the story. So we're going to talk about this and this, the points we want to make. Then it's just going to the team and saying, okay, we need visuals for this. How would you visually show this? We'll get some sketches and we go from there. It's interesting for me because I get to manage a diverse team. I'm very scientific, meteorology background, that kind of mindset. And then working with a bunch of people who are very artistically inclined and good at drawing and bringing things to life. And so I get to work with both those groups of people. And it's a challenge sometimes to translate through some of that, but it's a lot of fun too. And I've learned a lot from both sides. From the artists that I work with, they teach me more every day. I learn about how to more visually tell a story and what's important to have on the screen and how do you make things pop and easy to see and easy to read. I got to be able to glance at this image and care about it. I was always taught as an intern the mom and baby test, which is whatever you show on the screen, you have to be able to grab the attention of a mom walking through the living room holding the baby. That was just what we were always taught. And it's whatever you get on there, you have to be able to grab their attention to get those eyes. And sometimes that's on the digital side, sometimes that's on the broadcast side. It can all depend. But I think that's a big part of it. It's infusing that weather knowledge in there and knowing the information that's important to convey and then trying to figure out ways to convey it. And I think an understated part of my job is just the visual side of it and just everything I've learned from the artists that I work with and how to clearly tell a story. It's important work to get all that done and get everything on there so it's clear, crisp, and legible and all that. And sometimes that doesn't involve as much meteorology, but I learn a lot and I've grown a passion for what I do.
And you got a lot of different people with different backgrounds too. That's got to be a challenge in its own. How are you able to navigate that challenge?
You learn as you go a little bit, I think. And so some of it is just asking, what do you need? How can I help you? That kind of thing. And just, I think as I grow as a leader, as a manager, and as they grow as artists and individuals and professionals and meteorologists and all that, we learn how better to work with one another. And it's just learning what everyone's communication style is and how everything goes. Sometimes you need to do things differently depending on who you're talking to because just they receive information differently. I'm a very visual person. Like when I was learning in school and all that, it helped me to write it down and to see it and to draw myself a picture and figure it out. Whether that was a mathematical equation or something, anything like that, I need to see it. My brother is a good example of someone who's very auditory. He wants it explained to him. He wants to hear it and not necessarily see it. And so it's just about recognizing that and learning, okay, I can help you and you can help me by doing X, Y, and Z. So I always talk about this when I was in college. I remember I learned by seeing and I could talk it out to myself. I need to talk things out. I'm very verbal like that. I would remind myself and study by like teaching things. So when we were studying a concept or something, I would stand up at the chalkboard and write up whatever it was and would explain it to people. And then some of my classmates benefited from that because they were like, I need it explained to me. I need to hear it. And so I need to read it and speak it and see it. And you need to hear it. So it's like a win if I just stand up here and do that.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, has there been a moment where somebody asked you a question or somebody to explain something to them and maybe it wasn't as easy? Like it's not as straightforward?
I'm sure it's happened. It gets difficult, but it's just realizing what each person needs and going from there and being receptive to that feedback. One of the most important things I was taught was just to listen, just sit there and listen. If someone comes up to you and needs something, and make sure you're responding to that accordingly.
What's the best question that you've been asked in your experience?
Oh, I've had some funny ones. The favorite thing I've been asked, and you might have even run into, I'm sure every Met's run into this before. I was actually at Newark Airport. I'm on the air train. I had just come back from some break or something like that. So I got my Rutgers sweatshirt on, my backpack, and I'm taking the air train so I can get the train station and go back to New Brunswick. And this guy sees my Rutgers shirt. He's like, "Oh, do you go to Rutgers?" I said, "Yeah, I do. I actually I'm just back." He's like, "Oh, well, what do you study?" I said, "Well, I'm studying meteorology." And I don't remember what year I was, but I was already declared at that point. So I'm like, I'm studying meteorology. And he's like, "Oh, what do you think about this meteor that's coming next week?" And of course, your reaction was perfect. It was just you kind of have that internal reaction is what you're doing, and it's just like smile and nod. Answer the guy's question, he gets off, and then somebody like comes to me and he's like, "That's not what meteorology is, it?" And I'm like, "No, it's not." But I was like, I just let that one go. And sometimes you just smile and nod. And it's like, I don't know why I thought of that, but when you brought up like, what's your favorite question? That's the first thing that comes because that's the one that everybody gets. Like, "Oh, I'm a meteorologist. Let me ask about asteroids," that kind of thing. So I think that's one of them. But it's interesting too, living in Alabama, we get a couple questions just given off of the weather that we're having locally. So we do a briefing every morning where we talk about weather happening in our area specifically, but also around the country. And it helped us see, okay, where is the severe weather going to be over the next couple days? We want to make sure we proactively reach out to clients we have in that area to make sure they're covered and all that kind of stuff. And then also our marketing team can learn about, oh, how are our models doing with a tropical scenario or something like that? Your tropical storm coming through, and we can talk about how the model has stayed really consistent. And they're like, okay, we want to learn about how do we write about that kind of stuff. So a lot of that going on, but we'll get questions about certain phenomena that we'll talk about. And it's neat for me to lean on that background, right? And be that kind of station scientist where it's a lot of, you're the person that these guys are going to. They have families here and friends here, and they have events that they're doing over the weekend. And they want to know, like, do I need to cancel this outdoor event? We can give them guidance one way or another. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll just go back to the meteor question. For those that were wondering, my reaction was I kind of just rolled my okay, because I've experienced that as well. And in fact, one of my brothers pokes fun at me constantly and is like, "So how about the meteors?" And he knows it's weather related. Yeah, he's just yanking my chain for that. But yeah, there's been a lot of interesting questions out there in the weather world, and you communicate it in different ways. And specifically for your job, you do it visually. So just curious, like of all of your different experiences, what has been the most rewarding experience during your time at Barron?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I think one of the most rewarding experiences is sometimes you go into stations where they're switching broadcast display platforms, and understandably so, that can be really scary because especially if you've grown up using one piece of software for forever, and then someone comes in and says, "We're not going to use that anymore." Like if you're going to switch from Android to Apple and just suddenly that's ripped from your hands, they tend to get hesitant. So I see that occasionally. And sometimes it's really hard for them. And I think the most rewarding part of what I do is going in and I can say without a doubt, I am going to do everything in my power to make this as easy as humanly possible for you. We are going to take the brunt of this workload so that you don't have to worry about all that because you got to retrain your brain into doing things differently. And so I get to go in, and this is back when I was a trainer, and I can tell them, look, trust me, you're not going to have to worry about insert all this stuff here. And there was one time where I showed up and we delivered all this stuff. And this meteorologist who was hesitant at first was like, "You have taken the weight completely off of my shoulders. You turned me into a lifelong fan." And hearing things like that, where it's like, yeah, I've heard our marketing team uses this quote frequently too, where they said, "We don't have a vendor, we have a partner." And that kind of really speaks to me. I think that's one of the most rewarding things is I know I've been in their shoes. I've felt that hesitancy in the past, and I now get to help make that easier for them. And I love doing it all the time. I think that's probably the most rewarding experiences. And it's happened a few times, but there's several different stations I've gone to that have all just said that gratification that they express is just something you can't put a price on. And knowing that you really helped make their lives easier and hopefully save some lives by making their lives easier because they can focus more on learning and how to use these tools that we are presenting to them to help convey serious weather information to their audiences.
That's the cherry on top right there, being able to help those people who are doing a really great job in helping others, the public, navigate the weather, make their job easier, make them feel more comfortable with the system. What's been the most important lesson that you've learned?
I think the biggest thing, and this is going to sound like everyone's heard this, but a picture really is worth 1,000 words. What I mean by that is put the smartest person in the world up there on a green screen, but if they don't have the visuals to back up what they're telling you, it's almost fruitless. The most important thing I've learned is that it really matters what's behind you and how you convey it. It's got to be easy to read, it's got to be quick and clear and decisive, and it's got to be relevant. It's got to tell that story that you're trying to convey. And that may seem like super broad, generic, but that's one of the most important things I've learned is just that those little things, the aesthetics, sometimes they matter a lot. And it's just making sure that information is out there. You can't just throw up a radar and not put a timestamp on it. It's those kind of things which sometimes we take for granted, but you have to make sure that all that stuff is legible and readable. And I think that's one of the big takeaways I've gotten.
Pictures worth 1,000 words. I never thought that would be applied to the visual weather storytelling enterprise and practice. And speaking of visual weather storytelling, it's a very interesting world out there right now. Technology has been rapidly evolving, not just over the past 10 years, but just the past 5 years. Social media, virtual immersive reality, different ways of visualizing different weather things. Where do you see that going in the next year, 5 years, or if you're bold, say 10 years?
It's tough to say because the climate, pun intended, is certainly changing. So the media climate is what I mean by that, is certainly changing. And it's just all about how do we adapt our storytelling to help reach more audiences as people start shifting how they're receiving information. So it's just staying on top of how are you getting weather information. That's one of the interesting things I learned from seeing talks at conferences and stuff like that, is it's a common question I hear social scientists asking is like, where do you turn to for weather information? How are you receiving that? And I'll give a backstory. My parents just moved out here from California because my brother is here as well. So they now live in Alabama with us. And I had to tell them what a weather radio was because growing in California, you don't need a weather radio. There's no reason for that, right? It's those kind of things and just figuring out everybody's learning to get information new ways. And I think it's about how is that changing in a digital landscape? Certainly a lot of cell phones and streaming television. You see a lot more streaming platforms now, which I think is awesome because people who don't have access to cable and stuff like that, that can help it out. And something like being able to pull up live television on your phone. Like, can you imagine what was it before the iPhone and somebody's watching TV on the phone? Like, you would look at them like they had four heads. It's like, this is nuts, right? Now it's normal. Like, you're sitting at an event or something and you're checking the score of your favorite football game because you can just watch it out live on television on your phone. And it's just, that's crazy to me. But I certainly think there's some changes in that regard. And it's just with any industry, it's all about how do you adapt and how do you get that information into more hands.
Yeah, there's a lot of different changes going on, and all the different things that you mentioned. Maybe it's something that you're currently working on or you foresee happening. What most excites you about the future of weather visual storytelling?
I think it's technology. And it's just as we get more and more advanced in the digital age, there's more and more tools coming into our hands. So think about weather model upgrades as those get better and arm meteorologists with more information sooner and more accurate and higher resolution and all of that stuff. Where does AI come into play? How can we use that to our advantage? Sometimes that's scary to think about, but it's like, how do we use that to our advantage? And I'll give an example where I've used AI on my own, like Chat GPT and that kind of stuff to help write scripts for various things that can do really cool things and automate stuff. So it's just such a powerful tool, right? And where's that come into play? So that's exciting. But the technology in general and the radars we're getting clearer pictures from radars. They can see farther, that kind of stuff. Satellite, it goes 16. We've had it for a while now. And I can remember being in college and that just like the best we had were those, what were they, 15, maybe 30-minute increments of satellite. And now you look at what we have, and we've had what 1 minute updates on some of these higher resolution cuts. And it's like, how did we live with those 30-minute updates before? And that wasn't that long ago. That was only what 5, maybe 10 years ago, certainly, that came out. And I can't remember when it was, but it's only getting better. And we're getting more and more data to use. And that data is power. That's information we can use to help forecast. And I talk about mesonet networks a lot. I see a lot more prevalence with those and getting up to date information across various sites all the way across the United States, and being able to probably bring some PTSD back a little bit, but like drawing fronts and finding where that front is. I always used to laugh when I did it. I'm like, I'm never going to need to do this by hand. Why do I need to learn this? And now I'm so thankful that I did it, because you can start to see those things, right? Like you can visualize where you're seeing it. So I think it's just, as we get further into the technological age, it's exciting to me the different tools we're going to have. And that's going to be, I think, on the display side too. We're going to have more, we call it 3D studio at Bear and Weather, but augmented reality, that kind of thing. And it's, how do I make it look cool while telling information? And how do I relate more to viewers that allows me to do things like, I could go out in the field and I'm at this famous pumpkin festival and I'm giving you the weather. And it's just those, how do you relate to people? How do you use that technology to, like I said, it's about getting that information in the hands of more people. And I think you do that by relating to them and going where they are, and showing that like, look, I can give you all this information and I'm standing where you stood. And a lot of people really get a kick out of that. So it's exciting to me, the future of this industry.
Yeah, and overall, the meteorology field, the future is very exciting. AI, social media, all the different technologies that you mentioned. It's going to be a very interesting world in terms of weather communications going forward, not just 10 years down the road, just 1 year down the road. And you had mentioned the immersive visual reality graphics and stuff. I wanted to pick your head a little bit with all the different graphics that you've worked on, all the projects that you've worked on. What's been your favorite graphic that you've created?
Favorite graphic I've created. We do a lot of graphics there, so sometimes that's hard. But I think one of the cooler ones we did one on Aurora Borealis and Northern Lights and how that worked. I think what I like about that is that one was just super well received. And it's like, you only need it every once in a while, especially down south, right? And I'm not talking like Minnesota and North Dakota. Like they see that all the time. But not all the time, but certainly much more frequently than you do in Alabama. But we've now had it, what was it, twice now in the past year that's seen it. Ironically, I missed it both times. I was unavailable and couldn't be outside. I was so sad. But anyway, it's exciting. It was exciting to see that reaction of how we explain that. And I think visually it looked really cool in one of our explainers. So I think that's probably one of my favorites. We've done other ones where it's like tornado safety explained. So you get a push notification on your phone. What do you do? And we have this like figure that gets up and goes to the safe space, and you have all your helmet and your shoes and all that kind of stuff. I think what I like about that one is we reinvented a way of telling that same story, which everybody's heard a lot. And so it's all about how do you not make it redundant? You gotta liven it up a bit. So I think that was cool. And then since you mentioned like the immersive stuff, pretty much anything we do now, we're making versions that are compatible with that. And we can do super cool things like bring water up onto the floor and talk about how much water it takes to knock a person off their feet. Or maybe it's hurricanes and wind shear and bringing a hurricane and putting it on the floor, and that's spinning, and then the dry air comes in and all that kind of stuff. It looks cool. And it's all about how you get eyes on your screen. That's what it is. And I think a lot of that is, to go back to my previous point, is the visuals.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a meteorologist. I've experienced weather producing and stuff, but the inner kid in me, whenever I see those immersive graphics, is just like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. There's nothing there when you're doing it, but when you play it back, you get to see all these cool things playing out, and you get to visually tell it in new ways. And who knows, maybe we get an immersive virtual reality Aurora Borealis thing that allows you to experience it. And on that note, I will say the two events that happened recently, very hard to see, very faint in New Jersey. I don't think anything's going to top those as is visuals that you would see up in Iceland or, farther up north. I got 2 questions for you. These are going to be time travel related questions. So let's say you got a time machine, you go back to your younger self, have a conversation. Like, if you can go back to your younger self, what would you say to him?
Wow. I think the advice I would give my younger self would be to don't limit yourself to certain tracks and be open, because I think it took me a while to become open to this side of the business that I'm in now. And I talked about doing that while I was an intern. That was like the first step of that. So I think the best advice I would give to myself would be to keep all of your options open, and you don't have to just narrow yourself. Because I think I went into school with the mindset of it is broadcast or bust. I am on camera, no other options. And I think I turned myself off from some other opportunities because of that. And it took a bit. And again, I was blessed enough to be at the Weather Channel and learn from some of the best there. And then also shadowing various other meteorologists and my time at Rutgers and my fellow classmates and all that, and learning stuff. And that kind of pushed me to where I am today. But yeah, I think that's probably what I would do, is just say, give myself, like, be open to things. And there was stuff like classes that changed while I was a student there where I was like, I don't need that, because there was a cool class on Python that you probably ended up taking that I was like, before there was a different class you could take. And that was actually before the different class was the only one you could take. And they added that other computational methods class while I was an undergrad. And I was like, I don't need that's just for grad school people, right? And then now fast forward, a lot of what we do in our software, some of it involves some Python. And so I'm self-taught Python, which is a gift and a curse, really. But it's really remarkable, some of the stuff that you can do with that coding background. So I think, and I mean, this goes to any young meteorologist listening to, don't just shut yourself off from stuff, because you never know the trajectory that your career is going to end up taking. And nonlinear trajectories are becoming the normal now. I have a really close friend who ironically ended up being our wedding photographer, was actually our trainer when I was at Rutgers. He came in and installed the weather system while I was at Rutgers. So he was a meteorologist turned wedding photographer. So you don't see that a lot either. But that's what I mean by, you never know the trajectory that your career is going to end up taking you.
That can be applied to everyday life, no matter the profession. Because I know a bunch of people that have gone, they thought they were going one way, but then life circumstances, everything just steered them the other way as well.
You never know, and you might just learn to love something that you couldn't see yourself ever doing.
Absolutely. And on the note of the time machine, you had mentioned earlier that you and your brother used to do simulcast weather and sports radio hits. Just out of curiosity, you have this time machine, you and your younger brother, you're doing these simulcasts, weather and sports. What day would you go to cover a certain weather event and sports at the same time?
So I'll say the first thing that came to mind, which was the World Series in 1989 when the earthquake hit. Not technically weather, but that would be a cool juncture between the two. That was the first thing that popped into my head. So I'll say that, even though it's not technically weather. Weather and sports combined. I think the big one that comes into mind is I was actually in the marching band when this happened, but that the Rutgers versus West Virginia football game, it was ironically exactly a year to the day before Hurricane Sandy, but it snowed sideways. It was like 30 degrees and snowing, and that is to this day the coldest I have ever been. But I think it's a funny memory, because I'm looking back on it. It was a really funny experience, because the Rutgers marching band was there and the West Virginia marching band was there, and pretty much the rest of the stadium was empty. Nobody else was watching this game because it was so cold and miserable. But neither band wanted to be the band that called it quits, right? We're all staying there. Everybody, I know, I never talked to any of the West Virginia band, but I know they had to be equally as miserable as we were, because we're standing there and we just wanted to go. We sent people to the hospital. It was bad. They had hypothermia, frostbite. Like it was real bad. Getting to the point where it's dangerous to be out there, because we're wearing cotton gloves, right? And that's just the snow is hitting that, melting in the heat of your hand, and now you have soaking wet gloves. You can't feel your fingers. But I think that's one of the first weather sports memories that comes to mind, would be that one, or the Snow Bowl, the Snow Super Bowl. That one's obviously very famous too. But
yeah, there's a lot of cases like that. But that story you just told me, that's a little hidden gem. And I feel like you two would nail it with talking about the weather and the game at the same time.
I got so many texts from my band friends in California that I like got out of the game, out of the bus, and I pull up my phone, right, which was in my garment bag. And it was just so many texts, and it was pictures of the TV screen because they saw it and they're like, "Are you guys really there right now? Are you really performing?" Like, "Yep, we're there." Now we didn't they had to plow the field, so we didn't do the field show, but we played the field show in the stands, and we were joking. We were like, "There's no one here to listen to it anyway. It's just us." So
Gosh.
it was fun. It wasn't fun at the time. I was like I said, that I think to this day is the coldest I have ever been. It was an interesting experience to say the least. And we lost the game, which made it even worse.
Just to throw salt into the wound, you're out in the cold and Rutgers
Fun,
lose.
fun fact, the quarterback of that game for West Virginia, Geno Smith. Fun fact.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
That was his
We got
year. Yeah.
Gina Smith, if you're listening somehow. I doubt it, but if Gina Smith, you're listening, let us know how that game, if you remember it, and how that felt.
Oh, and they're listening, go Niners.
And speaking of Niners, we've got one last game with you, and that is whether or not we're going to test your weather and not weather related trivia. And one of those questions is actually 49ers related, but we'll get into that when we get to that question. But that said, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. This is whether or not your first question is related to marching bands. In 1907, the Purdue All-American Marching Band created the first marching band formation that tracked away from the traditional rank and file formation. What was the name of that marching band formation that was created? Was it A, competition circle, B, P block, C, countermarch, or D, indie script?
I'm going to go block as a formation, but interesting. I'm going to go with C, countermarch. I'm going to guess that's wrong, though.
Is that your final guess?
Yeah, we'll call that my final guess.
That is incorrect.
Okay, so I flew over the
Formation.
block. Anyways, it's a big.
And I had to actually look up some like formations and stuff. And the last one, indie script, I just
Now I got
made up because it sounds like one. I'm not familiar at all with marching band. So that is an actual marching formation.
a block. So like a block in marching band is if you're in a parade, like the formation that you're in as you do your parade is the block. And you also hear sets thrown around, and that's just if you're doing a field show, your set is like your checkpoint.
Interesting. All right. Got a little bit of insider info on marching band. All right. This is whether or not your next question is related to winter weather. The February 2013 North American blizzard, also known as the Blizzard of 2013, brought major snow to the eastern United States and parts of Canada. It also went by this N name. Was it A, Nemo, B, Nico, C, Newton, or D, Niklaus?
I think it was Nemo.
Final guess?
Yeah.
You are correct. It was Nemo. And I know not a lot of people agree with the naming thing. That was the one I came up with. I thought it was, you were there. I believe you were there at the time. So I figured that was.
I don't remember it as a Nemo, but the minute you said February 2013, I knew what you were talking about. So
I figured, yeah. All right. This is whether or not your next question, actually, before I introduce it, you're actually a little bit of a Taylor Swift fan. So this question is Taylor Swift related. Taylor Swift made her acting debut in this crime TV show. Was it A, Criminal Minds, B, Bones, C, NCIS, or D, CSI Crime Scene Investigation?
ooh, I never saw this. I seen her. She made cameos in New Girl. I saw her cameo in New Girl. She's also in Valentine's Day, the movie with Taylor Lautner, who's also in it.
I don't know that
No,
movie.
It's a rom-com, but it's kind of cute. But anyway, it's really funny because at the time they were dating. But I'm gonna go with Criminal Minds.
Criminal Minds is your final guess?
Yeah.
You are incorrect. It is CSI Crime Scene Investigation.
Right, because
It's like it was a one
the
episode thing.
only one I watched out of those was NCIS, and so I was like, I knew it wasn't NCIS, and that was really it. So I'm like, I'm gonna guess Criminal Minds, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's funny because I had watched not like from start to finish CSI, but I've seen episodes of Crime Scene Investigation, and I didn't know Taylor Swift is actually in
Now I
that.
got
So
to track that down.
yeah, I'm gonna be doing the same after this.
CSI Miami, or which one was it?
Oh no, the original CSI, yeah, based out of Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're gonna be looking at that after we're done here. But got two more for you. This is whether or not this question is related to thunderstorms. A 1995 thunderstorm, also known as the Mayfest storm, escalated dramatically and caused almost $2 billion of damage in Texas, where it deposited 18 inches of what type of precipitation on the citizens of Palo Pinto and Parker counties? Was it A, rain, B, hail, C, snow, or D, graupel?
It's gotta be rain or hail. 18 inches of hail is insane, so I'm gonna go with rain.
Rain is your final guess?
Yes.
You are right. That is insane, but you are incorrect. It was hail.
I knew it had to be one of those two, and I'm like, surely it wasn't hail. Holy cow, that's a lot of hail.
Yeah, not a lot of pictures of that out there, but of the few that I saw, I was stunned. Like 18 inches of.
Not that 18
like,
inches of rain is any less nuts. That's also bonkers, but yeah.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like if you think like 18 inches of snow, like okay, that's a lot. But imagine that like as hail.
I mean, I guess
That's-
hail, kind of like snow, it's gonna pile up on top of each other, so I don't know. That helps.
Yeah. And my question is like, how did they get rid of that? That's a lot of hail.
Ultimately, I guess it would melt, especially in the heat.
18 inches though.
That's a lot.
All right, I've got one more for you, and this is the one that we mentioned in the intro of whether or not. This is whether or not your question is related to 49ers football. How many Super Bowls have the 49ers appeared in? Was it A, 4, B, 6, C, 8, or D, 10?
They've won 5. I'm gonna go with it's either 8 or 10. I'm gonna go with 8. Well, yeah, I'm gonna go with 8. I'm gonna go with 8.
Locking in 8 is your final answer?
Yeah.
You are correct. It is 8 Super Bowl appearances from the
Because
49ers.
they were undefeated until they played the Ravens. You're welcome.
I'm a Ravens fan too. Go Ravens.
Super Bowl. Yeah.
So, with that said, that is the last whether or not trivia question and the end of the podcast. But before we go, how can people stay in touch with you and your work, Tyler?
Yeah, best way is to follow on social media. So Barren Weather, several different social media handles, Twitter, I guess it's X now, but Facebook as well. So that's got to just stay up general with what the company is doing. But my personal social handle, Tyler Case WX. Yeah, shoot me a message on Twitter, that kind of thing, or email me.
Tag the Barren Weather social media and say, hey, we want Tyler Case. I don't think we have that big of a following, but maybe we could the Barren Weather inbox to blow up with Tyler Case requests.
Yeah.
All right. With that said, thank you, Tyler, for joining us on the podcast. And thank you to the listener for listening on this episode of Everything Weather. And we'll see you on the next episode.